A millionaire walks calmly through the park when a desperate 7-year-old girl runs up to him and whispers, "Please, sir, give me a quick hug. They're coming after me." He sees 2 police officers running toward them, and by pure instinct, he embraces the child. As the officers suddenly change their demeanor upon noticing a wealthy man, she whispers something in his ear that leaves him stunned. The afternoon sun cast a lazy, golden light over Magnolia Park, painting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Arthur Montenegro loosened the knot of his silk tie, a weary sigh escaping his lips. The meeting had been a staggering success, securing a new contract that would add several $1 million to his already vast fortune. But the process had left him drained. He was walking here not for pleasure, but out of necessity, trying to dissipate the tension that had settled on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. The world of high finance, with its astronomical figures, stock trades, and the constant pressure for profit, was a silent predator of his inner peace. He watched the families around him, the laughter of children echoing like a melody from a distant, simpler time. To him, that happiness seemed like a painting in a museum, something to be admired from a distance, but impossible to touch. His life was a fortress of control and routine, each hour meticulously planned to maximize profitability and minimize vulnerabilities. Emotions were liabilities, an unnecessary risk on his personal balance sheet. It was then that he felt an almost imperceptible tug on the hem of his expensive suit jacket. He glanced down, an eyebrow arched in restrained surprise. A little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, was looking up at him with enormous, frightened eyes, so dark and deep they seemed to hold all the world's fear. Her clothes were worn, her face smudged with dirt, and perhaps the tracks of dried tears. She was an element of chaos in his perfectly ordered universe. Before he could form a question, her voice came out, a hushed, urgent whisper. "Please, sir, just a quick hug. They're coming for me." Arthur frowned, his first instinct a flat refusal. A hug? From a stranger? It was an absurd request, an unacceptable breach of his personal space. His mind, trained to assess risks and calculate outcomes, screamed at him to walk away. Getting involved in the problems of a street kid was a high-risk investment with no apparent return. Yet, something in her desperate gaze held him. There was a genuine terror there, a raw vulnerability that pierced his armor of indifference. He followed the direction of her frightened glance, and his heart gave a lurch. Across the lawn, 2 uniformed police officers were walking with long, determined strides, their eyes scanning the crowd. This was no casual stroll. They were looking for someone. And with every step they took, the little girl's grip on his jacket tightened. The dilemma exploded in his mind. Logic versus an inexplicable impulse. Protect himself or protect this small, trembling creature. It was a choice that involved no money, no stocks, no financial markets. It involved something far more fundamental. In a fraction of a second, the compassion he kept buried under layers of pragmatism won the battle. He knelt, the fabric of his designer trousers creasing on the damp grass, and opened his arms. The girl launched herself against his chest, a bundle of fragile bones and fear. The hug was awkward, foreign, but he held her tight, feeling the tremor that ran through her body. The smell of the street and cheap soap filled his nostrils, so different from the imported cologne that usually dominated his world. The officer's footsteps grew closer, heavy and menacing. As he held her, feeling like an imposter in this gesture of tenderness, she lifted her face and whispered in his ear, her voice thick with panic. "They want to get me for something I didn't do. Please, don't let them." The seconds stretched with the slowness of hours. Arthur could feel the girl's heart hammering against his, a frantic drum of pure dread. The officer's footsteps on the gravel path sounded like an approaching death sentence. His mind, a precision instrument trained to analyze investments and predict stock market moves, short-circuited. Protecting this child was a massive liability, an uncontrollable variable that threatened the equilibrium of his entire system. His reputation, built with an artisan's care over 2 decades, could be tarnished in minutes. One photograph, one malicious witness, and the name Arthur Montenegro, synonymous with success and wealth, would be linked to some inexplicable scandal. He imagined the headlines, the ripple effect on his businesses, the suspicion from his partners. All his capital in dollars, euros, and even crypto couldn't buy back a destroyed reputation. Yet, the warmth of the small, trembling body in his arms was more real than any cash flow projection. Her whisper still echoed in his ear, a plea that transcended logic and spoke directly to a part of him he thought had died long ago. He held her a little tighter, a silent promise. The 2 officers stopped a few feet away. They were robust men, with features hardened by the routine of the streets. The taller one, with a thin mustache and cold eyes, fixed his gaze on the girl and opened his mouth to speak, aggression already creasing his brow. "Hey, kid, you can't just—" The sentence died in his throat. His eyes traveled up from the girl's tangled hair to the man holding her. They saw the custom-tailored Italian suit, the discreet gleam of the gold watch on his wrist, the polished leather shoes that alone were worth more than a month's paycheck. The officer's expression transformed instantly. The hardness dissolved, replaced by a mask of subservient respect. The other officer, shorter and stockier, nudged his partner, his eyes wide with recognition, or, more likely, an appraisal of the financial power radiating from Arthur. "Sorry to bother you, sir," the first officer said, his voice now oily and meek. "Didn't mean to interrupt. We were just on patrol." Arthur rose slowly, keeping a protective hand on the girl's shoulder as she shrank behind his leg. He met their gazes with an icy stare, the same one he used to intimidate competitors in boardrooms, a look that said he was not a man to be trifled with, that his fortune granted him a power they could not challenge. "Is there a problem, officers?" His voice came out calm and sharp, each syllable laced with unquestionable authority. The officer swallowed hard. "No, sir, no problem at all. We saw the girl running and thought she might be lost. But I see she's in good company." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is she your daughter?" Arthur hesitated for a split second. A lie was the easiest, safest way out. "She is under my protection," he answered, the ambiguity a more powerful weapon. "Now, if you'll excuse us." He didn't wait for a reply. With his hand still on the girl's shoulder, he turned and began walking in the opposite direction, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the officer's eyes burning into his back until they rounded a corner and disappeared from view. The immediate threat had passed, but the tension in the air remained, thick and poisonous. He stopped under the shade of an ancient oak and looked down at the girl. Her eyes, once filled with panic, now held a shadow of something deeper, darker. The relief he expected to see wasn't there. He crouched again, meeting her gaze. "They're gone. You're safe now." She shook her head slowly, the movement almost imperceptible. Her lips trembled as she finally spoke, her voice so low he could barely hear it, a terrible secret that turned his relief into a new kind of fear. "Not for long. They'll come back, and they won't stop until they find me." The sun continued its slow descent, bathing the park in hues of orange and rose, but the twilight's beauty was lost on Arthur. The girl's words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. "What do you mean they won't stop?" he asked, keeping his voice low and calm, fighting the knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. This situation was spiraling out of control at an alarming rate. He was a businessman, a multi-millionaire who dealt with markets, dividends, and the complex architecture of major investments. His life was a series of calculated decisions designed to increase his net worth. Not a street-level drama involving cops and a terrified child. The girl, whose name he still didn't know, glanced around as if fearing the trees had ears. She moved closer to him, the confidence in her gesture creating a bubble of forced intimacy between them. "I saw them," she whispered, her voice as fragile as glass. "Last week, near the alley behind the diner, I was scrounging for cans to sell." Arthur felt a pang of something that felt like pain. A child scrounging for cans to survive. It was a concept so alien to his reality of private jets and luxury penthouses that it seemed to belong to another universe. He heard about poverty, read about it in philanthropic reports, but he had never faced it so rawly, so personally. "What did you see?" he prompted gently. Her eyes widened with the memory. Those two, the cops. There were other men, bad men in expensive cars. They were giving packages and envelopes of cash to the cops, a lot of money. The bad men were smiling, and the cops were too. They took the money and said the coast was clear. The clarity of her account was chilling. She wasn't fantasizing. The simplicity of her description carried the unmistakable weight of truth. An eyewitness to bribery, to corruption, and not just any witness, but a child, the most vulnerable of all. "And they saw me," she continued, a sob catching in her throat. "I tried to hide, but one of them spotted me. He pointed at me and yelled, 'I ran!' I ran as fast as I could. They've been looking for me ever since. They tell people I'm a runaway, that I stole something, but it's a lie. They just want to silence me." A cold dread washed over Arthur. Silence her. The word sounded brutal and final. He grasped the magnitude of the danger. Those cops weren't just trying to scare a child. They were trying to eliminate the only evidence of their crime. Their change in attitude upon seeing him wasn't just respect for his wealth. It was fear. They couldn't just grab the daughter of a powerful man and make her disappear without raising questions. His hug, an impulsive act of compassion, had unwittingly become a shield. He stood up, his mind racing, processing the information with the speed of a supercomputer. The girl, who he learned was named Leah, looked up at him with a mixture of hope and desperation. She had placed her secret, her very life, in the hands of a complete stranger. "Where are your parents, Leah? Where do you live?" he asked. The most logical question in this illogical situation. The tears she had been holding back finally escaped, tracing clean paths down her dusty cheeks. "My mum, she was taken." Arthur's heart sank. Taken? Taken by whom? By the police. Other ones, not them. They said she stole things from where she worked, but my mom would never steal anything. She's good. She helps people. She was a social worker. Each revelation was a blow, a piece of a hideous puzzle beginning to form. A social worker, accused of theft, arrested. Her daughter, a witness to police corruption, now hunted on the streets. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, a deliberate and cruel design. Leah's vulnerability wasn't just that of a street child. It was that of the daughter of someone who, perhaps, knew too much. Someone they needed to discredit and remove. The innocence of the surrounding park seemed like a mockery. Here, amidst the tranquility and beauty, a dark conspiracy was unfolding, and he, Arthur Montenegro, the billionaire who had built walls to protect himself from the world's chaos, was now standing right in the middle of it. The phone in his pocket vibrated, a reminder of his other life. Probably his portfolio manager with updates on the Asian markets, or his lawyer with the final documents for his latest acquisition. But none of that mattered now. The most volatile and dangerous market was right here, in front of him, in the frightened eyes of a 7-year-old girl. He looked at Leah, at her fragility and her courage. To leave her alone now would be the same as abandoning her to the wolves. The decision he made in that moment wasn't based on logic or risk analysis. It was purely instinctual. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm, the uncertainty evaporating. He held out his hand to her, a gesture that would seal his fate. "You're not going to be alone anymore." The interior of Arthur's car was a sanctuary of Italian leather. polished wood, and silence. The city's noise was reduced to a distant hum, a world apart from the raw reality Leah knew. She sat in the passenger seat, curled up, her bare feet barely touching the plush floor mat. Her wide eyes took in every detail, from the glowing digital dashboard to the discreet silver logo on the steering wheel. It was like stepping into a spaceship, a vehicle from a future she had never imagined. For Arthur, the silence in the car was deafening. He usually used these moments to make calls, dictate memos, or listen to financial news. Now, the only sound was the soft breathing of the girl beside him and the buzz of 1,000 questions in his own head. What was he doing? Bringing an unknown child into his home, a fortress of privacy and security, was the antithesis of everything he stood for. It was a monumental risk. His partners, his lawyers, even his household staff would question his sanity. Leah's story, however compelling, sounded like a movie script. Corruption, dirty cops, an innocent mother framed. It was the kind of drama people like him paid to watch, not to star in. He glanced over at her. Her small profile, the smudge on her nose, the tangled hair. There was a resilience about her, a strength that belied her age and size. She didn't whimper or complain. She just watched, processing everything with a heartbreaking seriousness. He stopped at a red light and turned to her. "Are you hungry, Leah?" She hesitated, then gave a shy nod. The vulnerability in that small gesture hit him with unexpected force. He, a man who controlled an empire of businesses and assets, was faced with a human need so basic and fundamental, a child's hunger. The drive continued until they reached the imposing gates of his mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The wrought iron gates swung open silently, revealing a driveway lined with majestic oaks that led to a house that looked more like a museum than a home. Leah gasped, her face pressed against the window. "You live here," she whispered, her voice full of awe. It's bigger than the whole shelter." The mention of the shelter was another stab. He tried to imagine her life, a brutal contrast to the opulence that now surrounded her. Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a stern and efficient middle-aged woman who had been with Arthur for over a decade, met them at the door. Her normally impassive expression morphed into a mask of shock at the sight of the dirty, barefoot child holding her employer's hand. "Mr. Montenegro?" she began, confusion clear in her voice. "Prepare a guest room, please, Mrs. Gable," Arthur said, his tone brookings no argument. "And draw a warm bath and find some clothes for Leah, and then something for her to eat. Whatever you'd like," he added, glancing at the girl. She looked up at him with her big, dark eyes. "Pizza?" she asked shyly, as if requesting the most extravagant thing in the world. A genuine smile, the first in a long time, touched Arthur's lips. Pizza. Excellent choice. While a still bewildered Mrs. Gable led Leah upstairs, Arthur went to his study. The room, with its book-lined walls, mahogany furniture, and panoramic city view, was his command center. It was here he had built his fortune, turning a small inheritance into a billion-dollar empire. He sat down in his leather chair and dialed the number of his lead attorney, David Chen. "David, I need your help. It's a delicate matter." He summarized the story, omitting the most dangerous details, focusing on the situation of Leah's mother, a social worker named Clara Reyes. David's response was exactly what he'd expected, cautious and full of warnings. "Arthur, this is a hornet's nest. Accusations against the police. A theft case that's already closed. You're getting involved in something that could blow up in your face. Your reputation, your government contracts, all of it could be compromised. The safest advice is to hand the girl over to Child Protective Services and walk away." It was the logical advice. The advice his investor's brain screamed at him to follow. But the image of Leah, small and terrified in the park, was seared into his mind. The feeling of her small hand in his, handing her over to CPS now, knowing that corrupt police could be anywhere, felt like a death sentence. "I'm not abandoning her, David," Arthur said, the decision solidifying in his voice. "I want you to look into her mother's case, Clara Reyes, discreetly. Use every resource necessary. I don't care about the cost." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Arthur, this could be a very expensive mistake. And I'm not talking about money. It's a risk I'm willing to take," he replied, and as he said it, he knew it was true. For the first time in years, he was doing something that wasn't about profit or dividends. It was about what was right. He hung up the phone, feeling a weight on his shoulders, but also a strange sense of purpose. He left the study and went upstairs. From the guest room, he could hear the sound of running water and Mrs. Gable's soft voice. He paused outside the door, hesitant. That's when he heard Leah's voice, clear and a little stronger now. "Is he a good man?" "Mr. Montenegro," Mrs. Gable replied, surprise in her voice. "He is a fair man and very rich. He owns many things, many houses." Leah was quiet for a moment. "But he knows how to give hugs," she said, with devastating simplicity. Arthur stepped back from the door, the girl's words echoing in his mind. Did he know how to give hugs? That gesture in the park had been instinctual, almost alien to him. His life was built on distance and control. But now, fate had placed a child in his path who needed more than his money or his influence. She needed a safe harbor, and for some terrifying, inexplicable reason, he felt that safe harbor had to be him. The bedroom door opened, and Mrs. Gable emerged. Her stern expression had softened. There was a moisture in her eyes. "The pizza will be here soon, sir." "She's waiting for you." Arthur took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into unknown, dangerous waters. He entered the room. Leah was sitting on the edge of the enormous bed, wearing a silk pajama top that was clearly too big for her, her hair damp and combed. She looked even smaller and more fragile amidst all the luxury. When she saw him, a small smile touched her face. And in that moment, Arthur knew his lawyer was right. This was a hornet's nest. But he also knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that he had already been stung. The days that followed turned Arthur's mansion into unfamiliar territory. The rigid, silent routine that governed the house was shattered by Leah's presence. Small pink sneakers, hastily purchased by Mrs. Gable, appeared in unexpected places. The sound of a child's laughter echoed through the marble halls, a sound those walls hadn't heard in decades. Leah, with the remarkable resilience of children, began to adapt. At first, she moved through the house with the caution of a startled animal, awed and intimidated by the scale of everything. But gradually, curiosity overcame fear. She explored the garden, befriended Arthur's old Labrador, Hercules, and discovered the library, where she spent hours poring over art books, her eyes shining at the colors and shapes. Arthur found himself watching her from a distance, a spectator in his own home. He maintained his work schedule, locked in his study for hours, managing his vast financial empire. The calls about the stock market and negotiations for new acquisitions continued, but his concentration was split. Part of his mind was constantly attuned to the small presence downstairs. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the living room floor, drawing with a set of colored pencils Mrs. Gable had bought. He paused at the door, watching. She was completely absorbed, her tongue sticking out in concentration. He approached quietly and looked over her shoulder. She was drawing the park. There were green trees, a smiling yellow sun, and two figures, one tall, in a suit, and one small, beside him. The two figures were holding hands. A lump formed in Arthur's throat. That simple gesture, rendered in childish strokes, represented a bond he wasn't sure he was prepared for. "That's very good," he said, his voice a bit rough. Leah jumped, startled, but smiled when she saw him. "It's us," she said, pointing to the drawing. "The day you saved me." Saved, the word weighed on him. He hadn't saved her yet. He had only moved her out of immediate danger into a gilded cage. The real threat was still out there. David, his lawyer, called daily with frustrating updates. The case of Clara Reyes was a bureaucratic fortress. The records were sealed, testimonies were vague, and the evidence against her, while circumstantial, had been enough for a swift conviction. "Something's wrong here, Arthur," David said on one call. "It's all too clean, too neat. It's like someone set the perfect stage to frame her. The DA's office had an easy win, and I'm hitting roadblocks everywhere I turn. Doors are closing. People are refusing to talk. Someone powerful doesn't want this case reopened." The confirmation of his suspicions only added to the pressure. Protecting Leah meant fighting an unseen, corrupt system. And the system was starting to fight back. One morning, two men in dark suits, presenting themselves as agents from Child Protective Services, appeared at his gates. They were polite, but their eyes were hard. They claimed they'd received an anonymous tip about an unaccompanied minor residing on the property. Arthur met them in his study, his heart pounding. He knew this wasn't a routine visit. It was a warning, a shot across the bow. "The child is under my temporary care," Arthur said, his voice calm and controlled, projecting an authority he hoped they would respect. "I am in the process of regularizing her situation. She is the daughter of a family friend who is experiencing difficulties." The older man smiled, a smile without warmth. "We understand, Mr. Montenegro, but the law is clear. Unless you have legal guardianship, the child must be placed in state custody. It's for her own protection." The threat was veiled but clear. They wanted Leah. They wanted to take her where they could control her, maybe even silence her. He thought of the cops in the park. This visit had the same scent of intimidation. "That won't be necessary," Arthur said, rising. He walked to the window, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the garden where Leah was playing with Hercules. "My attorneys are already handling all the paperwork. I'm quite certain that any attempt to remove the child from this house without due process would be seen as a severe violation of her rights. A violation I would pursue to the fullest extent, with all the resources at my disposal." He turned and faced them, letting the implied threat in his words hang in the air. The men exchanged a look. They hadn't expected such firm resistance. They were used to dealing with people who were intimidated by government authority, not with a billionaire who wielded more power and influence than many politicians. After a few moments of tense silence, the older man stood. "We'll leave our card. We expect to hear from your lawyers soon." They left, leaving a trail of fear and uncertainty behind them. Arthur stood in his study for a long time after they were gone. The battle had been joined. They knew where Leah was. The fortress he had built around himself was no longer impenetrable. His enemies now had a face and a name. The very system that was supposed to protect the innocent. He looked at Leah's drawing, which he had taken from the living room and placed on his desk, the two figures holding hands. It was no longer just a drawing. It was a promise. And he realized with a terrifying clarity that breaking that promise would cost him something far more valuable than his fortune. It would cost him his soul. The visit from the supposed CPS agents was the spark that ignited Arthur's caution. The war was no longer cold. The first shots had been fired. He spent the night sleepless, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his tense face in the dark study. Influence maps, government department org charts, profiles of judges and DAs. He dove into a world of data, searching for connections, vulnerabilities, any crack in the wall his adversaries had built. His assets weren't just in cash and stocks, they were in information and access. He called in markers he hadn't used in years, collecting on favors from people in powerful positions who owed him for a successful investment or a piece of financial advice that had saved them from ruin. The message was always the same: absolute discretion. He needed information on the prison where Clara was held, on the officers who had hunted Leah, and on the CPS unit that had sent the agents. The answers began to trickle in, pieces of a grim mosaic. The two officers, Miller and Shaw, had a history of excessive force and misconduct complaints, all mysteriously dismissed. The prison where Clara was sent was notorious for overcrowding and the influence of corrupt guards. And the CPS unit that had visited him was headed by a man with known ties to a controversial local politician. The network was real, and it was wider than he had imagined. The external pressure began to seep into his inner circle. His partners at Montenegro Capital, alerted by whispers in the corridors of power, called an emergency meeting. The boardroom, normally a place of triumph and strategic decision-making, became a tribunal. Richard, his oldest partner and a man whose friendship he valued, got straight to the point. "Arthur, what is going on? We're hearing disturbing things, that you're harboring a street kid, challenging the police, investigating judges. Our government contracts, which represent a significant portion of our profit, are at risk. People are nervous. They're saying your behavior is erratic." Arthur looked at the faces around the table. He saw concern, greed, and fear. They saw Leah as a liability, a risk variable threatening their cash flow. They couldn't see the frightened girl, the wronged mother, the blatant injustice. "I'm helping a friend's daughter," he said, the half-truth sounding hollow to his own ears. "It's a personal matter that will not affect the company." "It's already affecting it," retorted another partner, a younger, more aggressive man named Matthews. "Our stock dropped 0.5 point this morning on these rumors alone. You're putting a personal whim above the interests of our investors. Maybe it's time you took a leave of absence, stepped away until this blows over." The suggestion was like a punch to the gut. The company was his life, the creation he had built from the ground up, and now they were threatening to take it from him. The loyalty he thought he had bought with years of success and generous dividends was as volatile as a cryptocurrency on a bad day. The argument escalated, voices rising. Arthur remained silent, feeling the weight of the choice forming before him: the company or the girl, his empire or his conscience. In the middle of the meeting, his personal cell phone vibrated. It was Mrs. Gable. He rarely received calls from her during business hours. A cold dread washed over him. He stood up abruptly. "I need to take this." Ignoring the protests, he stepped out of the room. "What is it?" "Mrs. Gable." "Mr. Montenegro." "It's Leah. The school called." The school. In an attempt to give Leah some normalcy and also to gather more information about Clara, Arthur had enrolled her in a small, discreet private school, using his contacts to expedite the process. He had hired private security to watch her from a distance. "What happened?" he demanded, his heart in his throat. She's gone." There was a commotion during dismissal. A car pulled up. 2 men grabbed her. The security detail tried to intervene, but they were too fast. "They took her, sir." Arthur's world stopped spinning. The air was sucked from his lungs. The arguments about stocks and dividends and reputation in the room next door seemed suddenly trivial. Absurd, they had her. While he was in here defending his fortune, the wolves had taken the lamb. A cold, overwhelming panic seized him, followed by a surge of rage unlike any he had ever felt. They had crossed the line. This was no longer about intimidation or pressure. This was an act of war. He walked back into the boardroom, his face a mask of controlled fury. Everyone fell silent at the sight of him. "The meeting is over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Matthews, you spoke of erratic behavior. You haven't seen anything yet." He turned to Richard. "Cancel all my meetings. You're in charge. I have a personal matter to resolve." He strode out of the room, leaving a stunned and frightened group of men in his wake. As he ran for his car, his phone rang again. It was an unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was distorted, metallic, but unmistakably menacing. "Mr. Montenegro." I believe you have something we want back, and we have something you seem to want to protect. Let's call it a trade, or maybe not. Stay out of what doesn't concern you, and perhaps the girl finds her way back to the foster system. Keep meddling, and we can't guarantee her safety." The call ended. They didn't want money. They wanted him to back down. They wanted him to abandon the fight. But kidnapping Leah had changed everything. It was no longer a choice. It was an obligation. They had made a fatal mistake. They had turned a calculating billionaire into a man on a mission, and he would use every penny of his vast fortune, every ounce of his influence, to destroy whoever was behind this. Panic was a wild animal clawing at the inside of his chest, but Arthur forced it down, trapping it under layers of ice. Adrenaline sharpened his senses, his mind operating with terrifying clarity. He couldn't afford fear. Fear was a liability he could not pay. Driving back to the mansion, he made 2 calls. The first was to David. "They have her. I want the name of every known associate of Miller and Shaw. I want the places they frequent, the cars they drive, the relatives they have. I want a map of their lives within the next 2 hours. Use whoever you need, private contractors, ex-cops, hackers. The budget is unlimited." The second call was to a number he hadn't dialed in over a decade, a number belonging to a man named Julian Croft, a former intelligence operative who now ran a private security and problem-solving firm out of London. A man who operated in the shadows, whose loyalty was for sale, but once bought was absolute. "Julian, it's me. I need you. On a jet. Now." He didn't have to explain further. Julian understood the tone. He understood what now meant coming from Arthur Montenegro. Arriving home, he found Mrs. Gable in the entryway, her face pale and tear-stained. "It was my fault, sir. I should have picked her up myself." "This is not your fault, Mrs. Gable," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly calm. "It's mine for underestimating them." He went to his study, which now resembled a war room. City maps were spread across the desk, laptops open, displaying security feeds and data streams. Information from David began to pour in. A list of bars, a gym address, the name of a cousin who owned an auto body shop. They were leads, fragments, but there was no time for a traditional investigation. The threatening phone call echoed in his mind. Stay out, and maybe the girl comes back. It was a trap. They wanted him paralyzed by indecision, weighing the risks, but the veiled threat to Leah's safety told him otherwise. They couldn't just release her. She was a witness. They had taken her to silence her. Every passing minute decreased her chances. He looked at Leah's drawing, still on his desk, the 2 figures holding hands, a promise he was failing to keep. The fury returned, hot and pure. He picked up the phone, ready to do the one thing the kidnappers would never expect. He wasn't going to retreat. He was going to attack. He called the editor-in-chief of one of the country's largest newspapers, a man whose career he had, indirectly, saved years ago by exposing a corporate fraud the journalist had been investigating. "Marcus, I need a favor, a big one. I have a story that's going to shake this city. Police corruption, kidnapping of a child witness, and the name of the man at the center of it is Arthur Montenegro." There was a shocked silence on the other end. "Arthur, are you turning yourself in?" "No, I'm exposing myself. I want you to run it, now, on your website, your social media. Billionaire Arthur Montenegro accuses police of kidnapping his adoptive daughter." "Adoptive daughter," Marcus stammered. "She will be. The story is that I was in the quiet process of adopting her when corrupt cops, whom she witnessed taking a bribe, kidnapped her to silence her. They're trying to intimidate me into dropping the case of her mother. An honest social worker they framed. Use my name, use my power. Make this story so big, so public, that they can't hide her or hurt her without the entire world watching." It was the highest stakes poker play of his life. He was pushing his entire reputational capital onto the table. He was making himself the center of the story, painting a giant target on his own chest. But in doing so, he was also putting Leah under a spotlight so bright it was impossible to ignore. Hurting a billionaire's adoptive daughter was a far riskier proposition than making a street kid disappear. The story exploded online in under 30 minutes. The name Arthur Montenegro, paired with words like kidnapping and police corruption, was an explosive combination. Social media went into a frenzy. News channels broke into their programming. His phone began ringing incessantly. His partners, his lawyers, the police, the mayor's office, he ignored them all. He was looking at the GPS tracker he had, in a stroke of paranoia or premonition, placed in a small charm on a necklace he'd given Leah a few days before. A little friendship gift. The red dot blinked, stationary, in an abandoned industrial area by the shipping yards. They hadn't found it yet. The news spreading like wildfire was his insurance policy. He hoped it would panic them, force them to make a mistake. The plan was risky, but it was the only one he had. And then something unexpected happened. His phone rang. It was a blocked number, but it wasn't the distorted voice from before. It was a real voice, a woman's voice, hesitant and terrified. "Mr. Montenegro, my name is... It doesn't matter. I'm one of the officer's wives, Shaw's wife. I saw the news. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know they would take the child. My husband came home in a panic. He said things got out of control. That their boss is furious about the publicity. They have her in an abandoned warehouse on Pier 12. Please, my husband isn't a monster. He's just scared. He was coerced." The call disconnected. This was it. The turning point. His bold gamble had worked. The public pressure had created a crack in the wall of silence. They were panicking. And now he knew exactly where Leah was. He didn't call the police. Who could he trust? He grabbed the keys to his fastest car, a black sports car he rarely used. As he went downstairs, he found Mrs. Gable in the hall, clutching a rosary, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Their eyes met, and she saw the steel determination in his face. He wasn't going to wait for a rescue. He wasn't going to negotiate. He was going to get back what was his, and may God have mercy on anyone who stood in his way. Night swallowed the city as Arthur's car sliced through traffic, the engine growling like a caged beast, the neon lights of the skyscrapers blurred into colorful streaks, a surreal backdrop to the desperate mission he was on. The address for Pier 12 burned in his mind, a beacon in the darkness of his anxiety. Every red light was torture, every slow car ahead an unbearable obstacle. The call from the officer's wife, an act of desperation and conscience, was the only thing keeping him from succumbing to total panic. The information was a weapon, and he intended to use it. He wasn't going alone. He wasn't an action hero. He was a strategist. Julian Croft was still hours away, so Arthur called the head of his personal security, an ex-military man named Torres, a calm and lethally competent individual. He met him, along with two of his best men, at a prearranged spot a few blocks from the docks. "The situation has changed," Arthur said, his voice steady, hiding the tremor in his hands. "I have the location. I want you to go in, create a diversion, and get her out. No direct confrontation if possible. Her safety is the priority." Torres nodded, his face impassive. "And you, sir?" "I'll be the bait," Arthur said. It was another plan born of instinct rather than logic, but he felt he had to be there. He needed them to see him, to focus their anger and panic on him, giving Torres the window of opportunity he needed. The port area was a labyrinth of rusted cranes, stacked shipping containers, and derelict warehouses haunted by the smell of salt and decay. The moonlight barely pierced the fog rolling in off the water. It was the perfect setting for a nightmare. Arthur left his sports car a safe distance away and walked toward Pier 12, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could see the warehouse, a cavernous metal structure corroded by time. A single yellow bulb flickered over the main door. Torres and his men melted into the shadows, moving with the silent efficiency of ghosts. Arthur took a deep breath. He was a man accustomed to boardrooms, to negotiations worth fortunes. His weapon was his intellect, his shield was his wealth. Here, in this hostile environment, none of that seemed to matter. But he had something else, a motivation so powerful it turned his fear into armor. He approached the door and pushed. It groaned open, the sound echoing in the vast, empty interior. The scene that greeted him froze the blood in his veins. Leah was tied to a chair in the center of the space, lit by the single, lonely bulb. She wasn't crying. Instead, she glared at her captors with a look of defiance that filled him with a painful pride. Miller and Shaw were there, looking cornered and nervous. With them was a third man, older, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in this setting. The man radiated an aura of corrupt authority. This had to be the boss, Shaw's wife had mentioned. "Mr. Montenegro," the man in the suit said, a smug smile on his face. "How reckless of you to come here alone. I expected more from a billionaire." Arthur ignored the cops and fixed his gaze on the man. "Let her go now," the man laughed. "You're in no position to make demands. You've caused a great deal of trouble. The publicity, a masterstroke, I admit, but also a mistake. Now, this has become a problem we need to solve, permanently." The air grew heavy with the implied threat. Arthur felt a chill, but maintained his facade of control. "You think you can make me and a little girl disappear? The whole world is looking for me, my partners, the press, my lawyers. My every move is being tracked." "Details," the man said dismissively. "Accidents happen. A tragic fire in an abandoned warehouse. A rich man trying to save his daughter from desperate kidnappers. It's a sad story, but it happens." As he spoke, Arthur saw a subtle movement in the dark rafters above. Torres was in position. He needed to buy more time. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, the question genuine. He wanted to know the name of the man who had orchestrated his nightmare. "Let's just say, I'm a man who values order," the boss said. "And your philanthropic crusade is disrupting that order. The girl's mother, Clara, she was a disruptor too. Asked too many questions, stuck her nose where it didn't belong. We had to neutralize her." The casual confession about Clara fueled Arthur's fury. This wasn't just corruption for money, it was a deeper rot, an arrogance of power that crushed innocence for convenience. "And all this for some bribery?" Arthur scoffed, trying to provoke him. The man smiled. "The bribery is just the tip of the iceberg, my friend. It's about control of the system. Pension funds, public contracts, city bids, a vast and lucrative network. The girl's mother stumbled onto something much bigger than she could handle. And now, so have you." At that moment, the warehouse lights flickered and died, plunging everything into total darkness except for the small circle of light from the single bulb. Shouts of confusion and panic echoed in the dark. It was Torres's signal. The sound of a struggle, a dull thud. Arthur didn't hesitate. He ran toward Leah, using his memory of her location to guide him in the blackness. He reached her, his fumbling hands working at the knots in the rope. "I'm here, Leah. It's going to be okay," he whispered. The warehouse's emergency lights kicked on, casting a ghostly red glow over the scene. Miller and Shaw were on the ground, neutralized by Torres's men. But the boss was nowhere to be seen. Leah was free. Arthur hugged her tightly, the relief so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. She clung to him, trembling uncontrollably. "I knew you'd come," she sobbed against his chest. He lifted her into his arms, ready to get out of this hellhole. That's when he saw him. The boss was near the exit, not fleeing, but waiting. And in his hand was something small and metallic that glinted in the red light. Not a gun. A syringe. "You can have the girl," the man said, his voice calm and sinister, "but you can't win the game. There are rules, and you broke them." Before Arthur could react, the man moved with surprising speed. He didn't go for Arthur or Leah. He went for Shaw, the younger cop, who was groaning on the floor. In one fluid motion, he plunged the needle into the officer's neck. Shaw choked, his eyes widening in terror and shock, and then his body went limp. "Loose ends are a liability," the boss said, looking directly at Arthur, before melting into the darkness of the port, leaving behind horror and a new, terrible complication. The silence that followed the boss's disappearance was more terrifying than the preceding chaos. The warehouse, bathed in red emergency light, looked like a grim movie set. Shaw's lifeless body on the floor was brutal proof that the rules of the game had changed dramatically. This was no longer about corruption and intimidation. It was something far more lethal. Arthur held Leah tighter, her small body still shaking. He shielded her with his own, turning her away from the gruesome scene. Torres approached, his face grim. "We have to get out of here. Now, local PD could be on their way, and we don't know who's on his payroll." Arthur nodded, his mind racing. He looked at Miller, the other cop, who was huddled on the floor. His eyes fixed on his partner's body, the color drained from his face. The terror had broken him. He was no longer a threat. He was a terrified witness. "Bring him with us," Arthur ordered. "He's our only link to the boss." Torres's men, efficient and swift, hauled the trembling officer to his feet and moved him, along with Arthur and Leah, to one of the security team's discreet vehicles. The drive back to the mansion was conducted in a tense silence. Leah fell asleep in Arthur's arms, exhausted from the trauma. He watched her sleep, her serene face finally at peace, and felt an overwhelming mix of relief and fear. He had rescued her, but at what cost? He had dragged her deeper into a world of danger he barely understood himself. The mansion, once a symbol of his wealth and isolation, now felt like the only safe haven in a hostile world. Julian Croft had arrived, the middle-aged Englishman, with his piercing grey eyes and an air of perpetual calm, was waiting for him in the study. He listened to Arthur's account without interruption, absorbing every detail. "The man you describe sounds like someone known as the consultant," Julian said finally, his voice low and precise. "He doesn't belong to any one organization. He's a freelancer, hired by various crime syndicates and corrupt factions to clean up problems. He is intelligent, ruthless, and practically a ghost. The fact that you saw him, that he spoke to you, means you have become his primary problem." The information was chilling. Arthur wasn't fighting street cops. He was fighting a specialist in making people disappear. "And the syringe?" Arthur asked. "One of his signatures, usually a fast-acting neurotoxin, difficult to trace in an autopsy. Looks like a heart attack or an aneurysm. Clean, efficient. The study, his sanctuary of power, suddenly felt vulnerable. The threat was no longer at his gates. It was seeping through the cracks. "What do we do now?" Arthur asked, the question of a general to his field marshal. "First, we harden the defenses," Julian said. "This house becomes a fortress. Second, we get Officer Miller out of here. He's a target. I'll arrange a secure location for him, and my team will debrief him. He's scared enough to talk. Third, and most importantly, we need an offensive." He leaned forward. "The consultant made a mistake. He exposed himself. He underestimated you. He thought killing the cop would frighten you off. Instead, it's given us a weapon, an eyewitness to the execution of a police officer. That raises the stakes. That brings in federal agencies, people he can't control as easily." As Julian outlined the strategy, Mrs. Gable entered the study quietly. She had put Leah to bed and now looked at Arthur with a concern that went beyond that of a mere employee. "Sir, the girl, she woke up and is calling for you. She's frightened." Arthur felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Julian's war strategy on one side, a child's need for comfort on the other. He stood up. "I'll be right back." He went upstairs and found Leah sitting up in bed, hugging her knees, her eyes wide and moist in the dim light of the room. "You're not going to leave, are you?" she whispered, her voice filled with the primal fear of abandonment. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed. He took her small hand in his. "I'm not going anywhere. I promised you wouldn't be alone anymore, remember?" "But they're bad," she said. "They want to hurt you too." Her perception struck him. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. In that moment, the bond between them deepened, solidified. It was no longer him protecting her. It was them together against the world. "Yes, they are bad," he admitted, "but we're going to be smarter and stronger. You know, in my business, I sometimes have to deal with people who don't play fair. And I've learned that the best way to beat them isn't to have more money or more power. It's to have something to fight for that's more important than anything they want." Leah's eyes searched his in the darkness. "What's more important?" He squeezed her hand. "You and your mom. Bringing your mom home. That's what's most important." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of fear. It was one of hope. He stayed with her until she fell asleep again, her breathing becoming even and deep. When he returned to the study, his resolve was harder than steel. Julian watched him enter. "All right?" "Yes," Arthur said. "Let's finish them." But as he said the words, a new, terrible obstacle surfaced in his mind. He turned to Julian, the color draining from his face. "Her mother, Clara, she's in prison. If the consultant knows we're coming for him, what's to stop him from getting to her first? She's the most vulnerable target of all." The silence in the study was broken only by the ticking of an antique clock, each second marking the time that Clara might not have. Arthur's realization hung in the air like a death sentence. Clara was the Achilles heel of their entire operation. As long as she was in prison, she was within reach of the consultant's network. Every move they made to expose the conspiracy increased the danger to her. It was a cruel form of blackmail. Press forward and she pays the price. Julian Croft, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence. "We need to get her out, legally if possible, illegally if necessary." Arthur's mind, trained to find creative solutions to complex business problems, began to whirl. "David!" he exclaimed, grabbing the phone. "I need you, now. War Council." 20 minutes later, David Chen was in the study, his face pale with sleeplessness and worry. Arthur and Julian brought him up to speed on the night's events. The lawyer, normally the voice of reason and caution, listened with growing horror. "Arthur, this is beyond anything I've ever handled. This isn't a legal case. It's an intelligence operation." "Exactly," Julian said, "and we need your legal skills to give us cover. What's the fastest way to get someone out of prison?" David ran a hand through his hair, thinking an emergency appeal, bail under exceptional circumstances. But that requires a cooperative judge. And from what you've told me, we don't know which judges are trustworthy. "Then we find out," Arthur said. "Julian, you and your team, I want a dossier on every criminal court judge in this city, finances, affiliations, vulnerabilities. David, prepare the most compelling appeal you've ever written. We'll argue new evidence has surfaced, that the inmate's safety is at imminent risk due to a conspiracy she was about to expose. We'll leak parts of the story to the press, build public pressure." The plan was audacious, a high-stakes maneuver that could backfire spectacularly. They were, in essence, declaring war on a potentially compromised judiciary. As Julian and David delved into the technical details, Arthur stepped away, the weight of responsibility crushing him. Clara's life, Leah's safety, the future of his own company. It was all on the line. He wandered through the silent house, ending up in Leah's room. She was sleeping deeply, a picture of innocence amidst the chaos he had unleashed. He watched the curve of her lashes on her cheek, the way her hand was curled into a small fist beside her face. A protective love, fierce and overwhelming, filled his chest. It was a feeling so powerful it frightened him. He had spent his entire life building walls to keep this very thing out, the vulnerability that comes with love, his fortune, his business, his assets. He could lose it all and rebuild. But if something happened to this little girl, he knew he would be broken forever. It was then he noticed a crumpled piece of paper beside her pillow. It was one of her drawings. This one was different. It wasn't of the park. It was a woman with a warm smile and curly hair, hugging a small girl. Below it, in a child's hesitant script, was written, "Mommy." A wave of pain and determination hit him. He wasn't just fighting faceless villains. He was fighting to reunite a mother and child. He was fighting for that smile he only knew from a drawing. He returned to the study, his resolution etched on his face. We have to move faster. For the next 2 days, the mansion became the nerve center of a clandestine operation. Julian's team worked around the clock, unearthing secrets long buried. They found a judge, an older man named Ramirez, with a reputation for being incorruptible, but who had been sidelined by the system for his stubbornness. More importantly, they discovered his only daughter was battling a rare disease, and the costs of her US-based treatment were draining his life savings. It wasn't a vulnerability for blackmail, but an opportunity for a different kind of approach. Arthur requested a private meeting with Judge Ramirez, not in a courtroom, but in a quiet coffee shop. The judge was a tired-looking man, but his eyes still held a spark of intelligence and integrity. Arthur didn't offer a bribe. Instead, he told him the story of Leah, of Clara, of the cops, of the consultant. He presented the initial evidence Julian had gathered, including the recorded testimony of the terrified Officer Miller. The judge listened in silence, his face a mask of concentration. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Montenegro?" he finally asked. "What do you stand to gain?" "I stand to gain the chance to fix something that is terribly wrong," Arthur said, "and maybe the chance to sleep at night." He then changed the subject. "I heard about your daughter. I have a medical foundation. One of our specialties is connecting patients with cutting-edge experimental treatments. No cost, no strings attached, just one man helping another." Judge Ramirez stared at him for a long moment, his experienced eyes weighing every nuance of Arthur's expression. He saw the sincerity there. "File your lawyer's appeal tomorrow morning," the judge said. Standing up, "I'll make sure it finds its way to my desk." It was a victory, the first major one. But as Arthur returned home, feeling a rare flicker of optimism, Mrs. Gable met him at the door, her face grey with worry. "Sir, it's Leah. She has a high fever and she won't stop repeating a name. Aunt Helena. She says Aunt Helena is in danger, that they're going to get her too." Arthur frowned. "Who is Aunt Helena?" "I don't know, sir, but she's very distressed. She said Aunt Helena was her mother's best friend, the only one who knew everything." A new alarm bell went off in Arthur's head, a loose end, a witness they hadn't considered. If Leah, in her feverish, delirious state, was remembering her, it was possible the consultant and his network knew of her existence as well. While they were focused on getting Clara out of prison, a new, vulnerable target may have been left completely exposed. The race against time had just gained a new competitor, and they didn't even know she was on the track. Arthur's world, which had already become a complex strategic chessboard, suddenly shrank to the space of a bedroom and the feverish heat of a child's forehead. A private doctor had come and gone, diagnosing a stress-exacerbated viral infection and prescribing rest and medication. But no medicine could quiet the agitation that came from Leah's mind. In her delirium, she murmured fragments of conversation, names and places, and the name Aunt Helena was a constant, terrified refrain. "They'll get her, like they got Mommy. Aunt Helena has the box. Mommy's box." The word box set off an alarm in Arthur's head. Could this be the evidence Clara had gathered, the reason she was framed? He sat by the bed, dabbing Leah's forehead with a cool cloth, feeling helpless. All his billions, all his power, were useless against a virus and a child's haunted memories. He summoned Julian and David to his study, which was now operating on a 24/7 basis. "Forget the judge for a moment," Arthur said, his voice taut with urgency. "We have a new priority target. Helena, Clara's best friend, possibly in possession of crucial evidence, and from what Leah is saying, in imminent danger. We have no last name, no address. Start digging." The task was like finding a needle in a city-sized haystack. Julian's team began cross-referencing data. Clara's employment records, friends lists on old social media accounts, phone records David managed to access through legal maneuvering. The hours dragged on, Leah's fever wouldn't break, and Arthur's anxiety mounted with every passing moment. He tried to gently probe Leah during her brief moments of lucidity. "Leah, honey, do you remember where Aunt Helena lives?" "On the Flower Street," she murmured once, her eyes glassy. "The house has a blue door, and it always smells like sweetbread. She makes the best sweetbread in the world." Flower Street and blue door. They were fragile, almost poetic clues, but they were all they had. Julian fed the terms into search algorithms, cross-referencing them with street names and satellite imagery. It was a desperate expenditure of time and manpower. The pressure from the outside world didn't stop. Richard, his partner, called, his voice a mix of panic and anger. "Arthur, the board voted. They've temporarily suspended you as CEO. They say your actions are damaging the company's value. Our stock is down almost 2%. They're talking about invoking conduct detrimental to the business clauses. You could lose everything you've built." Arthur listened, detached. "Let them sell their shares, Richard. There are more important things than profit." He hung up. The act of ending the call, a symbolic abdication from the world he had once considered the center of his universe. His priority was upstairs, in a darkened room. The breakthrough came late the next afternoon. Julian's team found a Jasmine Street in a working-class neighborhood. One analyst, spending hours scanning street view images, found a small house with a faded blue door. The owner's name wasn't Helena, but utility records showed payments made by a Helena Campos for the last 6 months. It was her. The race was on. Julian dispatched Torres and his team, but he went ahead himself in a discreet car. Arthur stayed behind, an agonizing decision. He couldn't leave Leah. He was by her side, holding her hand, when his phone rang. It was Julian. "We're here. No sign of a break-in. The house is quiet." Arthur held his breath. "Go in, carefully." He could hear the sound of a door opening, Julian's footsteps on what sounded like a wooden floor. There was a silence that lasted an eternity. Then Julian's voice came back, low and urgent. "Arthur, you need to see this. The woman, Helena, she's here. She's okay, but terrified." She was packing a bag, ready to run. "What did she say? Does she have the evidence?" Arthur demanded, his heart pounding. "Yes and no," Julian replied. "She has a key to a safe deposit box at a bank. She said Clara gave it to her days before she was arrested. Clara told her it was Leah's inheritance, in case anything happened to her. The inheritance wasn't money, Arthur. It was documents. Proof." Arthur felt a surge of triumph. They had it. They had the key to bringing the whole thing down, but his elation was short-lived. Julian's voice grew even grimmer. "Helena said something else, Arthur. Something Clara discovered in her last week as a social worker. The reason for all this, it isn't just corruption. It's about what they were doing with the city's public pension funds. They weren't just embezzling money. They were replacing the assets with fake, worthless investments. The entire retirement system for thousands of city employees is about to collapse. It's a financial time bomb, and the only person with the knowledge to prove it, besides the documents, is Clara herself. Suddenly, freeing Clara was no longer just about justice for one innocent woman. She was the only living person who could prevent an economic catastrophe that would ruin the lives of thousands of families. And she was still locked in a prison controlled by the very men she could expose. The consultant wouldn't just kill her for revenge. He would kill her out of necessity. Julian's revelation transformed the climax of the situation from a personal battle into a crisis of catastrophic proportions. The fates of thousands of ordinary people, teachers, firefighters, nurses, now rested on Arthur's shoulders. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate him. Leah's fever finally began to subside, and with her newfound clarity, she looked at Arthur with a trust that was both heartwarming and terrifying. He had promised to bring her mother back. Now that promise was intertwined with the well-being of an entire city. Time was the enemy. The appeal for Clara's release was in Judge Ramirez's hands, but the legal system moved at a glacial pace. Every hour Clara spent in that prison was an opportunity for the consultant to act. "We can't wait for the judge," Arthur told Julian and David, the decision forming in his mind. "It's too risky. We have the key. We have to get to those documents now." The plan was simple in concept, but extraordinarily complex in execution. David used his contacts to pinpoint the bank and box number. Julian and his team mapped out a strategy to retrieve the contents without raising alarms. Helena, terrified but determined to honor her friend's trust, agreed to help. She would be the face of the operation, while Julian's team provided invisible surveillance and security. The day of the operation arrived, shrouded in palpable tension. Arthur remained at the mansion, the nerve center of it all, coordinating by phone. Leah, sensing the gravity in the air, sat quietly beside him, holding his hand. It was as if her presence gave him the strength to continue. At the bank, Helena, discreetly accompanied by one of Julian's agents disguised as her nephew, presented the key and authorization. Every second she spent inside the vault room was an agony for Arthur. He could hear Julian's controlled breathing over the comms link. "She has the box. They're on the move." The moment Helena cleared the bank and got into the getaway car, all hell broke loose. Two black sedans appeared from nowhere, boxing Julian's car in. Armed men piled out, not police, but mercenaries, professionals. The consultant was no longer hiding behind intermediaries. It was a brutal frontal assault. "We're under fire!" Julian yelled into the comms, the sound of squealing tires and crunching metal in the background. "Plan B, protect the package!" Arthur listened as the comms dissolved into a chaos of shouts and struggles. His heart sank. The plan had failed. The enemy was always one step ahead. He felt defeated, hope draining away. But then, Torres's voice, calm amidst the pandemonium, came over the channel. "Mr. Montenegro, the package is secure. The first team was a decoy. We transferred the box to a second team 2 blocks away. We are en route." It was a brilliant piece of misdirection by Julian, a layer of deception Arthur hadn't even known about. They had anticipated an intercept. When the box finally arrived at the mansion, Arthur's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were not just documents and bank statements. There was a small journal written in Clara's hand. It was a detailed accounting of dates, names, account numbers in offshore havens. It was a complete roadmap of the conspiracy, irrefutable proof that would destroy dozens of powerful people. But there was something else. On the last page of the journal was a single, hastily written sentence. "If you are reading this, I have failed. The mastermind is not who they think. The key is in the name Montenegro." Arthur read the line again, his blood running cold. Montenegro, his name. How was that possible? Was it one of his partners? Richard? Matthews? Was the betrayal that deep? His mind raced, connecting dots that had previously seemed random. The suspicious dips in his company's stock, the resistance from his partners, the consultant's knowledge of his movements. Someone on the inside was leaking information. Someone with the name Montenegro. And then the truth hit him, a truth so monstrous and personal it stole his breath. It wasn't one of his partners. There was another Montenegro, his uncle, Horace Montenegro, his father's younger brother, a man he hadn't seen in years, a man he had cut out of his life for his shady dealings and lack of scruples, a man he knew had deep political connections and controlled investment funds, including the city employees' pension funds. The memory of an argument from years ago flooded back. His uncle, furious at being cut out of a major deal, yelling, "You may have inherited the name and the seed money, Arthur, but I will build an empire in the shadows that will make your little fortune look like pocket change." The enemy wasn't just a corrupt system or a phantom consultant. The enemy was his own family, his own blood. The person who should have been his mentor was the monster at the center of the web. At that exact moment, the mansion's security alarms blared, shrill and deafening. Julian burst into the study. "He's here!" The consultant, not in an assault team, alone. He surrendered at the gates. "He says he wants to talk to you. He says he has a proposal." Arthur looked at the evidence in his hands, at the devastating revelation about his uncle, and then toward the door. The moment of truth had arrived. It was no longer about protecting Leah or saving Clara. It was about confronting the dark legacy of his own family and deciding, once and for all, what kind of man he was. The choice he was about to make would define not only his future, but that of everyone he had tried to protect. The rain began to fall outside, drumming against the study's bulletproof windows like the nervous fingers of fate. The consultant's proposal was as audacious as it was evil. He sat in the chair opposite Arthur's desk, not as a prisoner, but as an ambassador from a dark power. Julian and Torres stood guard, but the man seemed unintimidated. He radiated a lethal calm. "Your uncle, Horace, is collapsing the operation," the consultant said, his voice neutral. "Your public exposure has made things too noisy. He's moving the capital offshore. In 24 hours, all digital proof will be gone, and so will he." Arthur stared at him, his heart a block of ice. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because my contract with your uncle is terminated, and because I see a business opportunity," the consultant replied, an almost imperceptible glint in his eye. "Horace made a mistake. He became emotional. He wants you destroyed, not just defeated. He has ordered a final resolution on Clara in the prison, and here, on you and the girl." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. "My proposal is simple," the consultant continued. "I stop the hit. I guarantee the safety of all of you. I disappear and you never see me again. In return, you give me the journal, the physical proof, and you forget this ever happened. Let your uncle go. You get the girl, her mother gets out of prison, and everyone moves on with their lives. It's a win for you. You save the family you've created." It was the ultimate temptation. The chance to guarantee Leah's and Clara's safety, to end the nightmare. All he had to do was surrender justice, let his uncle escape, and allow thousands of families to lose their life savings. Arthur looked at the journal on his desk. He thought of Clara, rotting in a cell for a crime she didn't commit. He thought of the faceless public servants who trusted the system, and he thought of Leah. What lesson would he be teaching her? That personal safety is worth more than justice, that the powerful can buy their way out of any crime. In that moment, he saw his father's face in his mind, a man of unshakable integrity who had always told him, "True wealth, Arthur, isn't in your net worth, but in your character." The decision was made. "No," Arthur said, his voice firm. "No deal." The consultant raised an eyebrow, surprised for the first time. "A noble choice, and a foolish one. You're condemning them all." "No," Arthur countered, standing up. "I'm betting on the right thing. Julian, turn him over to the federal authorities, the real ones. Tell them he's the key witness in taking down the biggest fraud in this city's history." The maneuver caught the consultant off guard. He was the hunter, not the prey. Before he could react, Torres and his men had him restrained. The mask of calm finally broke, revealing a flash of contained fury. "You will regret this, Montenegro." Arthur ignored the threat. He picked up the phone and called Judge Ramirez. "Your Honor, the game has changed. I have irrefutable proof and the star witness. I need you to sign the release order for Clara Reyes. Now, it's a matter of national security." Using the consultant's own blackmail as leverage, he convinced the judge of the urgency. The order was signed and electronically transmitted to the penitentiary. With the help of Julian's federal contacts, a team of trusted agents was dispatched to execute the order and ensure Clara's security. The second part of the plan was even bolder. Using the information from the journal and the confessions Julian's team had extracted from Miller, Arthur placed a call to Marcus, the newspaper editor. "Marcus, get ready for the story of your life. I'm giving you everything. Names, accounts, the entire conspiracy." And the name at the top is Horace Montenegro. The story was published an hour later, a journalistic atomic bomb that rocked the city's foundations. News of the pension fund fraud, linked to a prominent family and a web of corruption, caused panic and outrage. Horace's empire began to crumble in real time. As the city descended into chaos, a discreet car pulled up to the mansion's gates. Arthur walked down the stairs, his heart pounding. Leah was by his side, her small hand held firmly in his. The car door opened. A thin woman with deep shadows under her eyes, but with the kindest eyes Arthur had ever seen, stepped out. It was Clara. Her eyes swept over the mansion, the security, and then they landed on Leah. "Mommy!" Leah's cry was a sound of pure joy, a note of light in so much darkness. The two of them ran toward each other, meeting in the middle of the driveway in a desperate embrace, crying and laughing at the same time. Arthur watched, a lump in his throat. This was his victory, not the downfall of his uncle or the exposure of corruption, but this moment, this embrace. Clara looked up from her daughter's hair and met Arthur's gaze. Tears were still streaming down her face, but her look held a gratitude so profound it left him speechless. "You," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved her. You saved us both." Arthur could only nod, unable to speak. He had risked his fortune, his company, his life, and looking at the mother and daughter reunited, he knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had just made the best investment of his life. The main battle was won. Horace Montenegro was arrested trying to flee the country. The corruption network was dismantled, but for Arthur, the true resolution was happening right there, in his driveway, under the rain that now seemed to be washing away all the grime and fear. 7 weeks. It felt like a lifetime since that sunny afternoon in Magnolia Park. The park, once a stage for fear and desperation, was now a place of new beginnings. Arthur, Clara, and Leah walked across the same lawn, but the world was an entirely different place. The afternoon sun, the same as before, now seemed warmer, more welcoming. Leah ran ahead, throwing a ball for Hercules, the old Labrador, who barked joyfully, rejuvenated by the girl's energy. Her laughter echoed through the trees, a pure, healing sound. Arthur and Clara watched them from a bench, a comfortable silence between them. Clara, though still bearing the marks of her ordeal, radiated a new strength. Justice, however slow and difficult, had prevailed. She had been fully exonerated, and her testimony, along with the journal and the consultant's confession, was the final piece that secured the conviction of Horace and dozens of others. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Arthur," Clara said, her voice soft. "You risked everything for 2 strangers." Arthur looked at Leah, who was now rolling in the grass with the dog, her face lit with a radiant smile. "You weren't strangers," he replied. "Leah found me for a reason. Maybe I needed saving as much as she did." The journey had changed him in ways he could never have predicted. He had been removed as CEO of his company, yes, but the exposure of his uncle's fraud had ironically saved Montenegro Capital from ruin, as many of the fake investments were intertwined with the company's own funds. Richard and the other partners humbled and grateful, had begged him to return. He accepted, but on new terms. Half of his time and a significant portion of the company's profits would now be dedicated to a new foundation. The Justice Angels Foundation, chaired by Clara, had a clear mission: to provide legal protection and security for child witnesses of corruption and crime. The desperate hug in the park had become the catalyst for systemic change. The foundation's first project was to create a safe house, a place where children like Leah could find sanctuary when those meant to protect them became the threat. And the location chosen was a large property adjacent to Magnolia Park, donated by an anonymous benefactor. The money, the fortune, the wealth that Arthur once saw as an end in itself were now tools. The real net worth, he realized, wasn't in his assets, but in his actions. The greatest dividend he had ever received was Leah's laughter. The highest return on investment came from the glint of hope in Clara's eyes. Leah ran back to them, her face flushed with happiness. "Arthur, want to play tag?" Before he could answer, she threw her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "Please." That simple gesture, so different from the frightened embrace of 7 weeks ago, filled his heart. It was a hug of love, of trust, of family. He looked at Clara, who was smiling at him, a smile that said everything. "Of course I do," Arthur said, getting up and ruffling Leah's hair. "But you'd better be ready, because I'm very fast." He started to run awkwardly, laughing, feeling lighter and freer than he had in his entire life. The girl who had begged for a hug to hide from monsters had discovered that a stranger's courage could move mountains. The mother who had been imprisoned by injustice learned that the truth, even whispered by the voice of a child, is the most powerful force in the universe. And the millionaire, who lived in a fortress of solitude, learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or Bitcoin, but in human connection. Real power wasn't in hoarding an inheritance, but in building a legacy. The park, the silent witness to it all, now symbolized the promise that even in the darkest shadows, a single act of compassion can ignite a light so bright it blinds injustice itself, and that sometimes all it takes to change the world is the courage to offer a hug.